Recently, the IFC released an updated environmental and social management system framework for this year. At first, it may sound technical, but for countries like Bangladesh, it's financially critical. As climate, labor, and supply chain risks rise, unmanaged environmental and social issues are now turning into higher borrowing costs. Globally, lenders and investors are no longer pricing capital on balance sheets alone. They're pricing risk quality. Companies that can systematically manage environmental, social, and governance risks are increasingly able to access lower cost funding, while others continue to borrowing at a double digit rate. In fact, companies that qualify under GTF, TTF, or EDF funding windows can reduce their borrowing cost from 12 to 13% to as low as 5 to 6% once strong ESG and ESMS practices are in place. I'm Kashfa Bint Hassan, an analyst at Lion City Advisory, and today we will explore how the ESMS framework can be achieved and how it can help your business in increasing efficiency and lowering cost. Let's talk about the structure first. It starts at the top. Every company needs a clear environmental and social policy, not a symbolic one, but a real policy that commits to legal compliances, worker safety, environmental protection, and climate risk management. And what's critical is the policy must be owned by the leadership, secondly, approved by the board, signed by the CEO, and communicated across the organization, including the contractors and suppliers. Because if leadership doesn't own it, ESMS simply doesn't work. From there, companies are expected to properly understand their risks. As in, the IFC framework pushes companies to ask a simple but a very powerful question. Where can our operations cause harm or face harm? That means identifying risks to worker, the environment, local communities, and the supply chain. Each risk is assessed based on how likely it is to occur and how severe the impact could be. This allows companies to prioritize as not everything carries the same level of risk. And ESMS is about focusing on what truly matters. Once risks are identified, action is required. IFC follows a clear logic. First, avoid the risk if possible. If cannot be avoided, reduce it. And if impacts still remain, compensate or offset them. But intent alone is not enough. That's why every action must be assigned to a responsible person, backed by resources, given a deadline, and embedded into daily procedures. Otherwise, risks stay documented, not controlled. Now, none of this works without the people. That's why the ESMS framework emphasizes organizational capacity. Companies must clearly define roles, assign responsibilities, and train employees, especially on health and safety, label standards, and environmental controls. Furthermore, ESMS is a capability, and even with strong system, incidents can still happen. Fires, chemical spills, floods, and climate-related events. So companies are expected to plan for emergencies, identify scenarios, prepare response plans, train teams, and coordinate with local emergency services. Preparedness often determines whether an incident is contained or becomes a crisis. Now, another key element is stakeholder engagement. Companies don't operate in isolation. They affect workers, neighbors, and surrounding communities. The ESMS framework requires companies to engage with stakeholders regularly, listen early, and pay special attention to vulnerable groups. Because when concerns are ignored early, they escalate later into a huge disaster. That's also why grievance mechanisms are also essential. People must have safe and accessible channels to raise complaints without any kind of fear. Complaints must be recorded, investigated, and resolved. This isn't about formality. It is about preventing disputes, legal action, and reputational damages. Finally, ESMS is not a one-time exercise. Companies are expected to monitor the performance, track key indicators, conduct internal reviews, and involve senior management regularly. Because when management stops reviewing the system stops working. Now, here's why all of this really matters. When a company genuinely implements ESMS, not just on paper, but in practice, it starts to meet global ESG expectation. That changes how lenders and investors see the company. Instead of being viewed as a high-risk borrower, the company is seen as structured, transparent, and risk-managed. And that has a direct financial impact. In a market where many firms borrow at 12 to 13%, ESG-aligned companies can access specialized funding pools, including green and development-linked financing at much lower cost, often around 5 to 6%. So ESMS is not just about sustainable reporting, it's about reducing risk. And when risk goes down, the cost of capital comes down with it. At Lion City Advisory, we help companies translate ESMS and ESG compliances into real outcomes, including preparation for ESG-linked lower-cost funding. Which means we work with institutions and funding partners to help eligible companies access the capital at 5 to 6% once strong ESG practices are in place. For any kind of queries, feel free to reach us. Thank you so very much.